Hey everyone, I am joined by Rob Teller from Asetek. I've known Rob for quite a while. You used to be at NZXT.
Yep.
And now you do the liquid cooling stuff at Asetek.
That's correct.
So we have an interesting topic. Those of you who know Paul from Paul's Hardware recently was talking about liquid cooler failures. And we've talked about it a bit in the past. I wanted to talk to Rob and walk through what are the different points of failure, how frequent or infrequent is failure, what are the root causes, and I think the idea here is there's generally a stigma in the industry with PC builders of I'm afraid to use a liquid cooler, a closed loop liquid cooler, because I feel like there are more points of failure than a heatsink and a fan.
Yeah, there's like a gradient that like if they're not going to go custom loop, why even take the chance on anything leaking?
Right, or not even just leaking, but just like failure whatever that may mean.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about that. Before getting to that, this coverage is brought to you by the EVGA 1080 Ti SC2 and NVIDIA Destiny 2 bundle running up through September 4th. The 1080 Ti SC2 comes with asynchronous fan control for its dual fans, 9 thermal sensors, and again includes Destiny 2. Learn more at the link in the description below. So I don't know, how do you want to start with this one?
So we actually have a very good record on failure rates. Asetek as a manufacturer, we witnessed less than 0.25% failure rate, so that's a fraction of 1%, and it's actually going down every month we're shipping. It's continually decreasing. Failures can happen for a lot of different reasons, but the majority tends to be from the loop running at outside of the spec. Temperatures might be higher than what it's rated for, which could exacerbate and accelerate
permeation
rates. Yeah, and you covered that a lot.
Yeah.
We've done a lot to try to stave off permeation rates, but you can never get perfect sealed loop.
Well, yeah,
especially when you
permeation
start to go up in temperature.
Right, and so that's the main concern is like permeation is the idea of liquid leaving the loop, right? By getting normally, I guess, permeating the tubes, obviously.
Yeah.
And so as liquid leaves the loop, you lose lubrication on, what is it, a bearing?
Yeah, so the way it works, and there's all sorts of dynamics into what's considered a failure. Generally we would consider a unit to start failing if it creates noise that's outside of our noise spec. Right. That's usually the first way that you would witness a failure in the process.
It's like the rattling, gurgling type of noise?
Yeah, the air bubble noise after long-term use. Not what you hear when you get a fresh unit, you start it up and it goes through, but something that was working that no longer sounds like it's working, really.
Yeah.
And this could be delayed by making sure the radiator's in the correct orientation, having the tubes down, so you're not reprocessing more air into the loop. But a lot of people think that the units die or fail in a similar way that a fan or a hard drive would. So a lot of end users and even IT administrators in big data centers, they kind of look at components split up. You have your solid state components, and you kind of have your rotating, moving, bearing containing components, and those would be your fans, your hard drives, and they like to think that it's liquid coolers as well. But we do have like a big thing going for us that really sets us apart from all of those, and that's really that we have a solid sealed bearing design. So our bearing, we use ceramic bearings, just like every great bearing product that exists. It's not a cheap out plastic bearing or anything. So you start with a great bearing, you keep it floating in the propylene glycol water mixture. Propylene glycol acts as a lubricant, and it's completely sealed. So
it also helps with storage, right? In different temperatures,
absolutely,
like negative 40 C or something.
Absolutely. So nothing's happening. It's not being really exposed to the elements. You're not having dust come in. You're not having lubricant come out. You're not having any sort of interaction with the rest of your environment. And this really helps to extend the lifetimes of our bearings over, say, like a fan bearing or a hard drive even, where it's open air almost.
Well, so the biggest threat to the bearing is going to be if you lose liquid in the loop.
Correct.
Right. So how do you lose liquid in the loop? Generally, my understanding is you have it depends on the manufacturer and the product, but temperature threshold of what, like 60 Celsius?
60 Celsius.
And that's liquid temperature. Yeah. I think there's a misunderstanding for a lot of people where it's not 60 C like the temperature of your CPU.
Correct.
It's the temperature of the liquid. And to give perspective on this, in our i7 KB Lake coverage, we had the i7 up to 90 something Celsius, and the liquid was like 32.
Correct.
So you've got a lot of room there. If the liquid temperature starts going up, it might be because of something like the fan on the radiator dying, for example.
Yeah.
You're not cooling it anymore.
Or it might be time to clean out the radiator,
right.
Depending if your case
Dust.
has dust filters. Dust will act as an insulator and inhibit the heat transfer.
Right. So I guess the question there then is, on the liquid side, ignoring the fan aspect, since you don't make the fan, the liquid side, what would cause liquid in any loop to gunk up or to... I mean, permeation is mostly from heat.
Heat is really... it's hard to talk about this without trying to sound overconfident in the product.
Right.
But the failures generally come out when they're run out of spec. And the biggest way that these things go out of spec is when an end user wants it to run quieter than it should be able to, or handle a heat load that maybe is too great for that size of a loop.
Right.
And so when the heat goes into a loop, all sorts of craziness can happen. Heat, as everybody knows from high school chemistry, is a great catalyst. Everything gets faster.
Yeah.
So you have corrosion is not being inhibited as well. Which could build up gases and pressures. It could start to separate the propylene glycol from the water, which means you're not getting as homogenized a mixture of fluid, which could in turn further create more corrosion and gas buildup, as well as deforming plastics just because the temperature's higher.
You're basically boiling it on the inside.
And all throughout all of this, you have water permeating through at a much quicker rate than it was ever meant to. So that 60C, it sounds kind of innocuous to stay under it, but the moment you go over it, things get really bad very quickly. And it's not to say that, it went over 61C, the unit's worthless, And that's part of the difficulty is, even in the products that we certify, is we know 60C is good. We've done extensive testing to ensure that 60C is what'll create a lasting unit. Right. But the 61,
I've gotten away with,
63, what are the long-term things? We can't quite guarantee that.
We've gotten away with, like, for example, the NZXT Kraken plugs into a SATA power, right? I forget that sometimes.
Yeah.
And the thing is, like, you notice it pretty quickly because the system doesn't perform well.
Sure.
So, I don't know. Some of those units we still use, I've never had any problems with them.
Absolutely.
Like, in a test environment, so first of all, anything that does thermal testing has never had that problem because, you want it to be consistent. But if it's just a cooler that we use to keep the CPU cool and we're not doing thermal testing, it's fine.
Absolutely.
I don't know, maybe if you like cut it open and poured the liquid into a measuring cup.
It's also, it's generally fine, but it's also, at what point of its life have you run it at that? At what are the other hit points that product may have already
lost,
stacked up? So.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think you were saying what, 0.25% was your RMA rate?
So we're less than 0.25%. I think right now we're about 0.0015. So it's like less than 1/5% is where we're at right now.
Right. Yeah.
And so these things are pretty reliable. And then if you start to talk about failures in terms of a fear, not just the fear of having to deal with an RMA, but the fear of, are your components ever at risk by using these coolers? It's very, very rare.
For them to be at risk.
Yeah, for a catastrophic failure, which would mean that other components are affected, if there's that blast zone, if you will, is very, very low. The likelihood.
Well, the only reason that would even happen, I guess there's two reasons. One is a leak, and the other one would be like if the pump stops moving liquid and your CPU gets hot.
Yeah.
In the latter scenario, you have TJ Maxx that'll shut things down, or it'll just downclock like crazy and it's not at risk. And if it does do either of those things, you notice immediately.
Yeah, you'll usually, I'm not a plastics expert, admittedly, but generally from what I've seen, if you do hit T-Max on these CPUs, modern CPUs, the pump plastics may get deformed, but we're not, we try to design them in a way that it's somewhat intelligent. So even if there's plastic deformation, that it's not just like, Death Star point of failure.
Right.
This is where all the water is going to leak across. We do everything we can to ensure that we have the highest quality design possible.
Yeah, so. I haven't had any closed loop coolers leak, I don't think, from any of the manufacturers. Like Asetek, Cooler Master. We've had pumps fail, I think 2 times. One was the side-on that was on an FX 9000 series CPU, and I think just frankly, I think it was,
that's
too much.
That's a question of who is at fault right there. That's
yeah, but I mean, ultimately, like that point of failure, it's a 120 CLC on like a 200 plus watt CPU.
Yeah.
So it's just a lot of heat.
Yeah.
So it's gonna wear faster. I think one of the other ones we had fail was because the fan mounted to the radiator failed, and I don't know what kind of damage happened to the pump and the cooler.
Yeah.
But it's not cooling anymore because the fan dies.
Sure. And then it takes a little while to heat up the liquid to get to a point.
Right. So I guess one point we can make here is, I was talking with you the other day about, is with several of the motherboards now, actually, ACs for sure, you can set thresholds for when the system shuts down. So like you plug the pump, I think a lot of people don't know about this, you plug the pump and the fan into your headers, go into BIOS, check the settings for those headers, and there should be like a minimum duty cycle warning.
Yeah.
Right, where like if you hit 200 RPM or less or
your
whatever.
Cooling system has been degraded, system
Right.
needs to look into shutting down or reducing clock speeds.
Yeah.
And now we've got a lot of AIO headers too, which is really cool, and that's something that the motherboard industry has just kind of taken up on their own. There were always some compatibility issues with the motherboards trying to manage the fan speed, but it turns out to be a pump and it's not running right.
Well, so also you have issues there where if they're looking for a fan speed and they're hitting a pump with an 8-pole motor,
it's not going to be accurate.
The RPM's wrong.
And then you do some Google foo and you find out your number doesn't match what Google's number is, and you start to panic.
Because it'll say it's like, the Thermaltake Engine 27 is a good example. That's an air cooler with an 8-pole motor.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's an 8-pole. And if you plug it in, it'll read 5,000 RPM, which, like, if that thing spun at 5,000 RPM, you'd lose your freaking hand.
Yeah.
Like, it would take your hand out.
Definitely.
It's half of that, but that's just because, the motherboard's expecting 4.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. What are your thoughts in general on, like, if there are people who are concerned about, as an enthusiast, I don't want to buy the Kraken whatever, the Corsair whatever, because I'm concerned it'll fail. How do you reconcile that versus an air cooler? What's your main argument?
So I think I have really one of the most unique backgrounds for this type of question. So I mean, you've known me since I was at NZXT, where I started. And it's kind of 7 years into the industry now.
That's about right.
But so I started off working at NZXT, where we created the Kraken series. We were a customer of Asetek, and I was the product manager at NZXT to create the Kraken series. And so, NZXT had never really made a liquid cooler before. We didn't know what we were getting into. We didn't know what the potential difficulties in trying to do that might be. What if there were failures? What if there were catastrophic failures? And, really, we kind of just dove in. And we created the 140 series of liquid coolers. Most of the product wasn't substantially much more different than what was out there. But there weren't any negative side effects. We broke into the industry. We had a somewhat unique product, and we didn't see a huge spike in RMAs. We didn't see huge installation issues. We didn't have any of these potential.
And NZXT briefly had the Respire T40 as well. Like, so there was some experience in air coolers. Correct.
Yeah. And so we were still doing air coolers, and then at a certain point, NZXT decided, all right, air coolers are going to be relegated to a lower end while we try to elevate liquid coolers to a higher end. But not just DIY custom liquid cooling. The goal became, how do we provide the elite liquid cooling experience that you could pull out of a box and stick into your system? And so all throughout that, there's always constant fear. We did things in the second generation, which was the automatic pump control, which hadn't been done before, which seemed trivial, but when you start playing with fan speeds and you start playing with pump speeds and you don't know what the liquid temperature might end up being all throughout these scenarios, you go to bed with a little bit of a gut fear.
Oh yeah, because there's a million possible hardware configurations.
Exactly.
So you can't test for them all.
And then we made our own firmware, we made our own software at the point Cam got created. And every step of the way, you're like really excited to do something new, but you're always afraid of something happening. And largely in part, we haven't seen any major failures. You haven't heard a lot about like, don't buy this liquid cooler because it's just flat out bad.
Right.
As much, fortunately, Asetek gets to make most of the liquid coolers on the market, but I'm not afraid to say that as a whole, we haven't really seen a lot of just like bad eggs.
Yeah.
And I think that speaks to the bulletproof style of these designs. They're relatively simple. There's a little bit of a magic, a little bit of science fiction to them if you don't quite know how to break it down. And you've done a really good video detailing of how really simple it is once you look at it.
Yeah, pretty straightforward.
And so I think when you get an appreciation for that, you start to appreciate the design a little bit more, you start to understand its limitations a little bit more, and you're less likely to be afraid of these failures. And I've been pretty impressed. I will say, so I never had a liquid cooler before I worked at NZXT, and I didn't have one until NZXT started to make them. I've been genuinely impressed at how robust these designs have been and how long they've stood the test of time. I know a lot of people still use like the old Antex, old Corsairs, like way back.
Well, that's what I was gonna, another good topic is on time. A fact of liquid coolers is that eventually you'll have to replace the unit just because they're not impervious to time.
Absolutely, so, and that's the thing too that I know the PC community, especially the DIY building PC community, the same kind of thinking goes into, I don't want an integrated battery on my phone. Right. These are all points of failures. But when you start to break it down, and if you spend $100 on a liquid cooler, that'll get you through 5 years, and then generally most people aren't using them for beyond 3 to 4 years.
Yeah, usable life of the system expires.
Yeah, it's always nice to think that you want to keep all your stuff for a long time, and unless it's a Nalahem processor, you're probably not doing that.
Yeah.
So it comes down to being like, how practical is it, and you're getting really the best performance, the best convenience, the best reliability, with great warranties now, 5-6 year warranties on these products, from brands you know and trust, and who are improving their own customer service experiences every single day.
Sure.
I don't think there's really any reason out there nowadays to not do liquid cooling.
I would say it would be fair for, no product is for everyone. There are probably people who want a system with a long life that when they're done with it, they can shelve it and pull it out later.
Definitely.
Right?
Definitely.
And if you want to pull a system out in 6 or 7 years,
you
probably should have an air cooler in there unless you're okay with replacing stuff. It might turn on, it might be okay to get your files off, but this is, I guess the point of like transition from liquid to air, you can make an argument of, if you want this thing to be accessible 7+ years, whatever.
Sure. I think the discussion there starts to be is, all right, are you starting to play in a different league?
Right.
There's a lot of stuff where the cutting edge technology is really just not meant to be a lifetime solution.
Right, there's a reason it's not used in like enterprise stuff.
Exactly.
And liquid cooling is used in enterprise, to be clear, but there's a reason cutting edge isn't used in that kind of server environment.
I think the best way to kind of look at it is the time-tested, long-living solution is usually the first one to come about.
Right.
That's the one that people are less afraid of. There's less chance, there's less risk. No one's going to get fired for using it.
Because you always blame the product because it's been around forever.
Exactly. You can't.
It's a
bulletproof solution.
Right.
Come on, guys. Everybody uses Ticonderoga number 2s. All right. So when you do start to want that quietness, though, when you go to bed, when you do want to pick up that extra 100 to 200 megahertz, which usually it's much more than that. And you got a warranty, and you didn't have to fill it yourself, and you don't have to change the fluid every year, and you don't have to worry about corrosion inhibitors or any of this stuff, and it comes in all the colors you like. It has infinity mirrors and pre-installed mounting kits, and I think we've done everything we can to make it both easy, reliable, and cutting edge performance for the end users, and it's still always gonna be that little bit of fear of, well, what if?
Yeah.
And so you know, it takes a level of comfort, and it takes a level of understanding the product that I think
yeah,
gets
and
over
I would
that.
say like if someone takes all of your RMA numbers, your points of failure analysis and stuff, and tries to counter, probably the main counter is like, okay, but 0.25% or whatever it is for the liquid cooler, and then whatever it is for the fan.
Yeah.
So we have combined 2 points of failure. But I think like at that point, this is personally speaking, at that point you should basically be plugging the fan and the pump
Definitely
into a BIOS detected header that can just tell you if there's a problem,
And-
because you can't do anything about the fans really.
And that's a new type of technology that's come about
Yeah.
to even further ensure the performance and the lifespan of the product.
Yeah. Cool. Well, I don't know. I think that's pretty good overview of everything. Like,
No.
we use liquid coolers for most of our test benches. Personally, I put them in place because they're easy to set up. We're tearing down and building every single day.
Yep.
And air coolers are great. We still use air coolers too. But also, I don't know, I have probably 6 of every NZXT liquid cooler. I have 5 or 6 of the Corsair ones actively in use. And we've had maybe 2 pumps fail, depending on what the point of failure was. That's not so bad out of everything, especially considering one of them was from the fan.
Definitely.
And one was from a 220 watt plus CPU.
Absolutely. And you know, like I said, I think the best thing we could do is just ensure that you have a steady stream of liquid coolers that you could keep trying to kill, and hopefully make their way out of the lab.
Yeah, most of them survived so far. So yeah, that's it for this one. I just wanted to talk about Asetek's take on liquid cooling reliability. So there you all have it. Make
We're
of it
all
what you
about
will.
it. We're all about reliability.
Thank you, Rob, for joining.
Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, we'll see you all next time.
Handle a heat load that maybe is